everyone, I'm John Evans. Welcome to another episode of One on One. You probably did not know much about Jack Carr's first career. He spent 2 decades in military service to the United States as a Special Forces commander and then as a Navy SEAL sniper in Iraq and Afghanistan. Jack's second career, that's much more public. He has become a New York Times best-selling author, and his most recent book, The Devil's Hand, debuted at number 3 on the Times bestseller list. The first book Jack released, The Terminal List, is now being made into a special series for Amazon, starring actor Chris Pratt. Jack Carr has made the transition that many men and women could not. That's why he makes it a point to support organizations that help veterans begin and succeed in their post-military lives. Jack Carr, New York Times best-selling author, former Navy SEAL, commander in Iraq and Afghanistan, and probably most importantly, husband and father of 3 children. Welcome to the One-on-One with John Evans podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on. I sincerely appreciate that. And most certainly the husband and father pieces of all that are one, the most rewarding, and 2, the most challenging for sure. And obviously the most important.
I agree with you there. And thank you, number one, not only for your service to our country, which is tremendously important, but also the entertainment that you have given me through 4 books and so many millions of others across this country. Before we go any further, a big thank you in both of your careers.
Oh, appreciate that. Well, thank you for the support in both of those, and particularly now in the on the novel front. But it's something I wanted to do since I was a little kid. So it's off and running now, and actually working on book 5. Well, not as we speak, but as soon as we're off this interview, that's what I go back to doing before the kids get out of school.
Awesome. Are there similarities in James Reese and Jack Carr? I know you both have a military background. You both like your coffee the same way, little honey, little cream. But how much of Jack Carr is in James Reese?
So we do have that same background. He was a prior enlisted Navy SEAL sniper, which I was. He, when the reader meets him in the first novel, The Terminal List, he knows he's after this next deployment, and his is Afghanistan, that he's going to come home and he's going to move on because he's at that stage in his time in uniform where he won't tactically be leading guys on the battlefield anymore. He's worked himself to a rank where this is the last time where he's going to be doing that. And that's where I was in my last Iraq deployment. I knew that was the last time I would tactically maneuver guys on the battlefield. And that's what I came into the SEAL teams to do. And now it was time to move on, and time to turn that page and do the other thing that I wanted to do in life, which was write thrillers. So what's helpful to me is that I get to tap into some of the emotions and the feelings behind certain events, not necessarily the exact tactics or exactly what happened in Mosul or Baghdad or Ramadi or Kabul or wherever it was, but the emotions behind those experiences, rather than interviewing someone and asking them questions about what it was like to be a SEAL sniper in Ramadi at the height of the war, and then taking those answers, and they would filter their way through whatever biases I had, whatever preconceived notions that I had, whatever other research that I'd done, and then I take that and apply it to a fictional narrative. Whereas in this case, I just remember what it was like to be a sniper in Ramadi in 2006, and I take those feelings and emotions and I apply them directly into the narrative. So when the reader is at that point in the story, the feelings and emotions behind whatever that paragraph is, they feel authentic, they feel real, and that's because those emotions come from a real place. But there's all sorts of things I can tap into because we have those similarities. He likes Land Cruisers, as do I. Sure. He likes his coffee the way I do, and all those little things to kind of humanize the character, which I thought was important.
But who is James Reese, Jack? Is he a compilation of men you served alongside? Is he somebody who you think this country needs? Is there a formula for when you were creating the character?
Well, we're always going to need people like James Reese. There'd always need those people that are going to step up and hold the line, sometimes break glass in case of war. And he's one of those guys. He's one of the guys that you break glass in case of war. And in peacetime, maybe you don't want him around, or maybe he can flip that switch and he can be that family man. He can do those sorts of things, and those are what he's struggling with as a character. And he's not just the same character in each and every book dropped in a different scenario. He's an evolving character, just like we all are. We're all on this journey in life, and hopefully we're all learning and we're applying what we learn from successes and failures to our future decisions as wisdom as we go forward. So he's along this journey too, and the readers along with him along that journey. And right now he's at this stage where he needs to figure out what he is. Is he a soldier? Is he a hunter? Is he a killer? What is he? He has to figure that out, and the reader gets to go along with him. And I think that's a lot of what not just military people struggle with or have to figure out, but anyone doing any sort of a transition in life. And we're all going to go through transitions, whether it's one that we choose ourselves, like making a transition into a career field that we always aspired, and we're going to give it a shot, we're going to take a risk, or something that we can't control, a death of a loved one, or we get fired, or whatever it might be. We're all going to go through these transitions, just like my character. And he's going to evolve along this journey, and the reader's going to be along for the ride.
And I was going to ask you, we're right here in Wilmington. We're in the middle of a military big-time area. We've got Camp Lejeune up to the northeast, Fort Bragg to the northwest, Seymour Johnson Air Force Base to the north. And you've had a successful transition from military life, but many don't. And as a veteran and as somebody who served, do you have any idea why so many don't make that transition as well as you have?
I do, and I think I was very fortunate in that I got to study it. Study might be the wrong word, because it was a lot of observation and watching guys transition. Because my last couple of years in, I wasn't taking guys down range anymore, so my sole focus wasn't on being the best combat leader I could possibly be, wasn't on the area of operations where we were going to be deployed, so that I could make the best decisions possible under fire for my team. I got to take a breath, think about transition, and I got to see people transitioning out ahead of me. And I saw a lot of people have that problem in that they tried to recreate on the outside what they'd had in the military, what they'd had in special operations. And for us, when we go down range, we have our best friends to our right and left, our teammates to our right and left. We're solely focused on the task at hand, building these target packages and getting out to prosecute these targets, grabbing somebody out of their bed in the middle of the night, dragging them back, exploiting them for intelligence, going out and do it again. We're not worried about paying any bills or the leaky faucet or changing the diapers or going to a parent-teacher conference. All of our efforts and energy are focused on that task at hand, focused on the mission. And when people, then particularly in special operations, get out, I think they a lot of times expect there to be a similar type of experience on the outside, a similar team if they're joining another business that's already up and running. And I think realizing that this is one part of your life, and it's a foundation upon which to build. And you're not going to, and it doesn't have to be just the military, it's anything. Nothing's exactly the same as you move forward in life. And so just realizing that, taking a breath and not trying to recreate what you had in the SEAL teams, realizing this is a foundation from which to build. Let me take the failures, the successes, the lessons learned, and I'll apply them wherever I'm going to go next. But what is really key, I think, is identifying that passion, and then identifying that mission, and then molding those two together as you move forward. So for me, that passion was writing. My mission is taking care of my family. I brought those two together as I turned the page and moved forward and left the military side of my life behind.
Do you get messages from members of the military? You mentioned Fort Bragg again in this book. You've mentioned many establishments and installations in your books. Do you get messages from members of the military?
I do quite a bit. I try to answer all of them. It's getting harder and harder to do now, but I still try to do it. People reach out. Someone just reached out, the other day, and a very personal message. But one of the ones that really stands out was from the first novel, and someone said they read a passage that I wrote about killing, and they wrote me an email, and they said that it really helped them come to terms with what they'd done downrange.
Wow.
And it allowed them to move forward. Just having read that, I think it was 2 paragraphs where I really go into kind of the psychology behind my character's perspective on doing that job. And so someone reached out and really said, hey, that changed their life, their perspective, and allowed them to move forward.
What a gift that email was.
It was incredible. And I get similar ones fairly frequently, but that one really stands out because it was the first, it was early on, and it was so heartfelt and so genuine that it stuck with me.
Learned about your books through two of your fellow authors, Kevin Maurer and Tony Tata. Both have ties to Wilmington, and I've had them both on the podcast before. Love their books, love their work. Who's helped you along the way? Because they both said, you know, when Chris Pratt came aboard with the Terminal List project on Amazon, they both tweeted out, couldn't happen to a nicer guy. And who has helped you? Did those guys and their words mean a lot to you along the way?
So fantastic. Everyone that I've met in the publishing industry has been so amazing. And I didn't know going into it. I thought it would be kind of more competitive, or people would keep me at arm's length because here's the new guy coming in, encroaching on our turf type thing. The exact opposite was true. Everyone that I've met has extended a helping hand, blurbed the novels. Those guys in particular blurbed my first ones out of the gate. It meant so much to me that they would do that. And then the reason that I have a novel today is that Brad Thor cracked the door to New York publishing for me. And we got put in touch by a mutual friend, and people, now I know how many people tell you if you're an author that they want to write a book or they have a book. So I can only imagine after the 20 plus years that Brad's been doing this now, how many people have done that to him. And I was one of those people. But he took my call because someone had told him some things that I'd done in the SEAL teams, and he took the call and said, hey, kind of vetted me. It was like a job interview. And told him about my mom being a librarian, growing up surrounded by books, and all these guys that I'd read growing up, Tom Clancy and Nelson DeMille and A.J. Quinnell, J.C. Pollock and Stephen Hunter, all these guys who I had read and were essentially my professors in the art of storytelling. And eventually Brad said, okay, stop talking. If you write a book, I will let my publisher know it's coming because of what your friend told me that you did in the SEAL teams. And I said, that's all I need. And he said, when's it going to be done? And I said, a year from today. So finished it a year from today, called him back a year from today. He remembered me. He let New York know it was coming, and they read it and liked it. And next thing you know, we're off to the races. So I'll forever be grateful to him for doing that.
What is your process for writing? I've done some research on you, Jack, and you said you usually write a summary about it. But how does it take off from there? Does it grow tentacles? And take me through the whole process of whatever book it is that you want to go through. How long time frame, start to finish, and everything?
Yep. Well, now they have to take a year because now they're due. Now there's deadlines. The first one, there's not a deadline because you have no publisher, you have no readership, no one knows who you are. So each one so far, anyway, has followed the same path. In that I write a one-page-ish executive summary, kind of like what you'd find on a book jacket to get you excited about the book. So that's kind of what I, and as I'm writing that, I have some, maybe this happens, perhaps this happens, a couple of those in there, but a one-page executive summary, essentially beginning, middle, end, and a theme. And then from there, I take that and turn that into an outline. And that outline is broken down into to a prologue, to parts 1, 2, and 3, to an epilogue. So far, anyway, and this holds true for all the books up to book 5, which I'm writing right now. Then I think through that outline, and not so much that if I get stuck on a certain part, that it'll hold me up. I just put a couple X's in there and highlight it, and I go around it because I don't want to get stuck or mirrored down in this. How am I going to solve this problem? Knowing that I have an entire year to figure it out. Battlefield, you got to make decisions very quickly. You're adapting, the enemy's adapting, you're looking for gaps in the enemy's defenses, you're looking to capitalize on momentum, all these different things. But in writing, you're doing the same thing. But if you mess it up, the consequences aren't nearly as dire. So it's okay. You can sleep on it. It's all right. So then I take that outline and then I turn that into the novel. So thus far, that's how they've all worked out. And so far, for me anyway, that process works. I like knowing where I'm going. And then I like knowing how the next book's going to start. So right now, as I'm writing book 5, I know how book 6 starts. I know the theme to book 6. I know where that one's going. So I'm not wasting any bandwidth, worried about, oh boy, if I finish this book 5 like this, how am I ever going to start book 6, or where book 6 going to go? I don't have to think about that at all. All my energy is focused on making book 5 the best it can possibly be.
Before we started rolling today, I told you some of the ironies. I bought The Devil's Hand for a trip to Denver. Never been there. I'm reading it. I'm seeing you're talking about driving down Interstate 70 and the Safeway Distribution Center, the Purina plant. And I'm thinking, is Sebastian in the car next to me here? And then you talk about Centralia with Dr. J, who treated the victims in Richardson outside of Dallas in your book, and I have driven through that same community. Feedback like that must be pretty cool. because you imagine you get different kinds of feedback. Is there a favorite message you get, or are all of them welcome?
The 5-star reviews are the most welcome, I would say. Uh, but anytime you positively influence someone, or someone has a good time in the pages of your novel, or they can't wait for the next one, or you kept them up all night reading, like that's what you're after as an author, or at least that's what I'm after as an author. So that means the world to me. Anytime someone has a positive experience with a book or told a friend, because really, I mean, there are thousands of novels out there, and Simon & Schuster sees thousands of books across their desks every year. They chose this one for a reason, and the reason that it is successful, or why it is sold enough copies for me to be able to continue writing, is that people told a friend. And they took a risk on me as a new author, and then they risked their own political capital by recommending it to somebody else. And that was before I was on the Joe Rogan podcast, before I was on Tucker Carlson, before Chris Pratt announced that he'd optioned the movie and we're making a 8-part series for Amazon. Before all of those things happened, it was word of mouth from veterans, from tactical shooters, from hunters, from readers, that took that risk, told a friend, and it made the New York Times list before any of those other quote unquote bigger names or bigger platforms invited me on, or told anybody else about it. So it's really one-on-one, word of mouth is why I'm allowed to do it. So I'll never forget that, and I'm sincerely appreciative to everybody who took a risk on me and told a friend.
You were researching infectious diseases before the pandemic came out. That was the basis of this book.
Yeah.
And so it kind of played into it a little bit, but also I've heard you talk a little bit now about the theme for this, which is what our enemies have learned over the past 2 decades of watching us. So it really kind of fit hand in glove, didn't it?
It really did, and I didn't expect that when I outlined the novel in August of 2019. I outlined it on my way to and from Russia, where I was doing some research for Savage Son, my 3rd novel. Left my computer behind, left my phone behind, because I didn't want to walk through customs and have Russian intelligence, suck all these emails out of my computer devices, and who knows what people have sent me over the years with my background. So left all that stuff behind. I brought a sat phone and a notebook. And that's when I wrote out the entire outline for this novel. So I got back from that trip in August of 2019, and I incorporated some of those the boots on the ground research, the local flavor from Russia, from Kamchatka Peninsula to south of Siberia, into that 3rd novel. And then I dove into research for The Devil's Hand, infectious diseases, the history of infectious diseases, really from World War II up through today. So I was deep into that research when I first heard about COVID, and it was December of 2019. I first heard about something happening in China. And then in January, we started hearing a lot more, particularly near the end of January. And of course, by February, we all know what COVID-19 is. But with the theme of the novel being, what has the enemy learned by watching us on the field of battle? They're not just looking at the field of battle. They are looking at our domestic situation. They're looking at our reaction to COVID-19. They are looking at what we've done with this summer, which continues today, of civil unrest in our cities, very contentious political season and election cycle. And from all those things, they are drawing lessons, and they're taking those lessons and applying them to their battle plans. They're figuring out how they can exploit these situations, these weaknesses, to enhance their own positions. So it was very timely, much more timely than I thought when I outlined it in 2019, because I didn't know I'd be able to incorporate the summer of civil unrest and election cycle.
Right.
Well, I knew I'd be able to incorporate an election cycle, but not nearly as contentious as it became. And of course, our reaction to COVID-19 really fit in with the bioweapon catalyst that moves the plot forward in The Devil's Hand. So it just kind of how it happened. No idea that 2020 was going to be such a pivotal year in the history of our country and the history of the world.
You've talked a lot about your mom being a librarian and books growing up, but you don't talk much about your childhood, what you were like going to school. You said you wanted to be in the military. I've heard you say your grandfather fought and died in World War II. But what was a young Jack Carr like? Was he a good student? Was he a good athlete? Take us inside Jack's early years.
Yeah, so I think I was probably an average at all those things, but I was definitely a reader from a very early age, and I read things that interested me. And I read the nonfiction stuff on warfare at a very early age, histories of World War II, what was going on in Vietnam. And I was drawn towards this guerrilla warfare, towards terrorism, especially with some of my earliest memories are of the 1979 Iran hostage crisis. I remember those pictures vividly. I remember Walter Cronkite counting down the days we've had Americans in captivity. I remember Time magazine coming to our house, Newsweek coming to our house. I remember the newspaper coming to our house with those pictures, and then the evolving face of terrorism throughout the 80s during that time that was particularly impactful to me. So I think I was a serious kid growing up because I knew from an early age that that was going to be my war, that was going to be my enemy for my generation, and I studied it. And back then you could. Back then, you could go to the library. I could read Newsweek. I could read those magazines at the house. I could read the newspaper, and then I'd be done. There wasn't another website to go to. There wasn't another link to go to. There wasn't another distraction. It was like, okay, I've done this. Now it's time to go outside and run around and train. And it's time to do the pull-ups, and it's time to sprint the hill, and it's time to get on the roof and shoot my bow down at an angle with my heart rate pounding. So all those things, I was just focused on. I think I was very focused, I guess would be the best way to describe it, because I knew where I wanted to go, both in the military and then as an author, because once you've read all those things in, let's say, 1983 that you can read on warfare at the local library, well, what do you read next? Well, you read thrillers. And I saw my parents' bookshelf, and I saw these different authors that they were reading. And I heard about this guy, Tom Clancy, who wrote something called Hunt for Red October when I was in 5th grade. And who's this guy? What's all this talk about? Then I discovered David Morrell, who created the character Rambo back in 1972 with First Blood. And I read his novels. And then I found I found Nelson DeMille with The Charm School. And I found all these authors who had protagonists with backgrounds that I wanted in real life one day. So I just dove into these books, and I knew that one day after my time in the military, I'd write books just like the kind I was reading growing up. So what I didn't realize I was doing was I was giving myself an early education in the art of storytelling, so from the masters of the craft. And I think it would be different if I just woken up one day and said, oh, I'm going to give this author thing a try. What should I read?
No, you were on that path early.
I was building that foundation from a very early age. And my mom introduced me to Joseph Campbell and Hero with a Thousand Faces through a series of interviews he did with Bill Moyers on PBS called The Power of Myth back in 1988. And so I incorporated that kind of into my vision as I was looking at TV shows, I was looking at movies, I was reading books. Hey, does this follow that formula? Do I have a reluctant hero? Is he going on a journey? Does he meet a mentor? Does that mentor pass him knowledge or a tool? Does he emerge transformed from some sort of a crucible? And what does he do afterward? Does he come back from where he came to pass on those lessons to the next generation? So I was always just studying those things, but out of a pure joy. It wasn't because I'm like, I got to study this because one day I'm going to write. It was just, I loved it. And now all these things have formed the foundation for my novels.
You spent years in service to your country in life and death situations. Does writing provide that same adrenaline rush as it was in the military?
You know, I don't think the same adrenaline rush. There are similarities for sure, but not the same adrenaline rush. Very different, and that's okay. I think knowing that this next chapter in life is going to be different is one of the things that's important about making that transition. So definitely different, but you still have the stress. You know, you're worried. Like, so now I don't have a team, I have my family, and they're taking this risk with me, and they're on this journey with me. So that's a stress there. And then you have what's essentially art that you're unveiling to people who can now comment on it without any barriers. You don't have to write a letter to the editor. You don't have to write in and find an address and postmark it and put it in an envelope and put it in a mailbox and then wait for it to get to a desk and then have someone actually read it and then maybe publish it. It's right there. Amazon reviews, right there. Comment section on social media, right there. Zero barriers. So there's risk involved in it that way as well. But they're definitely different entities. And like I said before, the messing up in what I'm doing now, that's okay. No one's coming home in a body bag because of it. So I guess the focus is similar in that I know I have to. I'm focused on making the best product I possibly can. Downrange, I'm focused because it's for different reasons. Because that's what I owe the guys to my right and left. That's what I owe their families. That's what I owe the mission. That's what I owe the country. And now in this case, this is what I owe my readership. This is what I owe this fan base. This is what I owe my family. This is what I owe Simon & Schuster for taking a risk on me as a complete unknown and giving me my shot. So there are all those things, but very different from being downrange.
I like good writing, love good writing, Jack. And I mean, if I, on a newscast, if we bring in a story from another station and I hear a good line or I see a good story, I've reached out to reporters at other stations and said, I loved your story, love your writing, love the way you did this. What stops you in your tracks? Do you do that if you read something that somebody's done well, or if you watch something? What stops you and says, wow, that was well written, or wow, that was well done?
Oh yeah, yeah. There's not a group of a criteria, a list of criteria that I'll point to, but you definitely know it, and it's because that's the piece that's key. When you talk about formula or process, there's something missing from that equation, and that's heart. And the best artwork out there, the best movies out there, the best TV shows, the best writing out there, it has this thing called heart. And in the military, especially in special operations and SEAL teams and BUDS, that's what you have to get through that training. You have to have that grit. You have to have that heart. So same thing here. When I read a great passage in a book, or a book that I wish I could read again, I can't point to why, but I just know it. And that's the experience that I'm trying to, as I'm writing, if I'm getting emotional in writing a paragraph or a chapter or whatever it is, I like that, because then that translates over, I think, to my reader. Like, they're going to be emotional about it too. And that's what it is. It's that one thing you can't look at a list and say, okay, it has this, and this, it follows this sort of a pattern. Okay, I'm done. No. It's that heart piece. You can have all those things in place,
Right.
and it's not going to work. It has to have that heart.
Are you apt to drop a line to somebody, send an email to somebody, say, I love that,
Oh, yeah.
give encouragement?
Oh, absolutely. We'll do it. If it's an author, I'll post about it now, because now we can. Before, I guess 30 years ago, you'd have to find their publisher or their publicist and then call or write a letter. Today, I can just take that book and say, this was amazing. What a great reading experience. Highly recommended. Boom. And put it out there to my readership that's following me on these different social channels. So I'll do that quite frequently.
Being in my line of work, I get a chance to do a lot of assistance with charities and organizations. I lost my dad to the complications of diabetes. My wife is a breast cancer survivor. Lost my mom to cancer, her parents both to cancer. So there are those organizations like JDRF that I've worked for 20 years and worked alongside, and the Cancer Society. I imagine, as someone who has now become in the spotlight, you get a lot of requests for things and to donate. But what organizations do you try to assist? What's tight to Jack Carr's heart when it comes to helping organizations that help other people?
Yeah, the ones that help with the veteran transition, but don't just give a hand out. Do more of that mentorship piece. Allow veterans that are transitioning to test the waters in a couple of different industries to make sure that it's the right fit. So there's a few out there like that, and ones that have a touch point with our family. We have a special needs middle child, so ones that help families that are dealing with children that need a lifetime of full-time care. And so we have the National Ability Center right here in Park City, Utah, which is the main reason that we moved to Park City, Utah. And they help people of all abilities and disabilities reach their full potential, whatever that might be. They also have a very strong veteran program as well over there. I've seen so many people also struggle with the physical and emotional trauma of the battlefield, whether they're missing limbs or they're dealing with traumatic brain injury or post-traumatic stress, sometimes all of those things. And then you add complications of sleep deprivation with sleep aids, that sort of thing. You're adding some alcohol in there, maybe some marital problems, whatever it might be. And there's a foundation called Rescue 22 that helps provide fully trained service and support dogs for veterans. So there's some great organizations out there doing amazing work for children with disabilities and for veterans making that transition and dealing with this emotional and physical trauma of the battlefield. So those are the types of organizations that I support.
Seems like the ones that are closest to our hearts are the ones, at least in my case, with JDRF and the Cancer Society and stuff of that nature. You're protective of your family. You don't speak much. You speak about your middle child being special needs. But how important is your family, your wife, to this career? Obviously, being married to someone who's in the SEALs is one level of determination and dedication. but how important is she and is the rest of your family to what you're doing right now?
Oh yeah, I mean, I couldn't do any of this without my wife in particular. And yeah, she's out there each and every. While I was deployed, she's the one doing everything else, raising 3 kids. The middle one with those special needs, which adds a whole nother dimension to raising kids and keeping a family together. And so she inspires me every day with that strength. Like I can't imagine, I couldn't do half of what she does each and every day, even when I'm here. And that's when we get back from a deployment, like we have it easy downrange. Like we're fired up to go out and hit these targets. And then we come home, we start messing up the schedule. We think we're helping, but really we're just messing things up. So those transitions back home from deployments are always quite interesting. But it makes you stronger. It's made us stronger as a family. And my hope is that having that our middle child with the special needs has made us more loving, compassionate people. And hopefully it'll make his siblings, the one on the other side of him, more loving, compassionate people as well as they move forward in life and realize that, hey, look what mom and dad dealt with. Particularly, look what mom dealt with when dad was away. And then look what she continues to deal with today as he's in there typing away, writing these novels. Hey, and hopefully they take that on and say, hey, you know what, I can do it. I can do it too. Whatever adversity I am facing, I'm resilient. And look at what my parents did, and not just look at what my parents did. Look at what people have done from really the inception of this country up until today. Look what all these people have sacrificed, so I can have these freedoms and these options and opportunities that I have today. And then they can take a breath, put things in perspective, and charge forward. So, family is that's what this is all about.
I've got a nephew who is autistic. My youngest sister's youngest child is nonverbal and autistic. And I say, what I've learned from Anthony has made me a better person. And I think if we can take those steps and then working with the Autism Society, but also just making more people aware of everything like that, I think is a task I now take to hand as much as I possibly can.
Oh yeah, no, it's I mean, that's the best way you can look at this, because a lot of these situations are extremely tough and difficult, and obviously not what you expect as you become a parent. But you not looking at it in that kind of a light, it would be even more difficult, because you can definitely get tripped up thinking about how hard you have it, why did this happen to me, that sort of a thing, and you can't, because that doesn't change the situation, and only you get to control your attitude or how you look at some of these things. So you got to push that aside and look at what it's doing to make you a better person, those people in your circle a better person, your community better people, for your example in how you handle that situation. So it's just like everything else in life, it's an opportunity to grow.
You don't seem to me to be a waste of time kind of guy. How do you unplug? There's got to be a time when you just need to get away from everything. What do you do?
Oh, that is a great. So I'm trying to get better at that this year. So at this point, it's been a full-on sprint. The military was a full-on sprint. Every single second was spent trying to make myself a better operator, better combat leader. As I transitioned out, it was a full-on sprint into writing to make the best novels I possibly could. And then I realized, hey, there's this other side of writing and publishing. That's the business side that I never thought about. But you have to do everything that you'd have to do if you were starting a coffee shop in the business of publishing and writing. You have to do the marketing, and you have to do the advertising, you have to do social media and engagement and the budgets. You have to do all that. And that has nothing to do with typing away at the computer and coming up with these stories and solving problems on the written page. But it has to happen, otherwise you can't do that.
Yeah.
So that part was a shocker. But once again, you have to adapt and move forward. But to unplug, I like to get away from the devices. So I like to take the family, we put the phones down, the iPads down, the computers down. We go down into a river canyon where there typically is no Wi-Fi, but sometimes no cell service. So there's never even the option to look at that phone and tell your kid that, hold on 1 second, I just got to return this one quick text. That's not even an option.
Right.
So it goes away, drop down to these river canyons and spend a week on a river, just with nature. The kids are learning to be self-reliant. They're learning responsibility. They're learning a skill that they can then pass on to their kids. So I like to get outside with the kids as much as I possibly can.
There are a lot of books about writing for aspiring authors. David Morrell has one. Stephen King has one. You've often mentioned both of those guys in interviews. But from Jack Carr's perspective, I mean, you self-built yourself a second career. So that young man or young lady who may be listening to this, what is your advice?
It's not to spend too much time reading how-to books. Everybody, it's like there's a few, and it doesn't have to be just writing, it can be anything in life, whatever you want to do. You can study something forever, but eventually you have to pull the trigger and execute. And everybody's going to have a different point along their path when they think they've done enough research, or when they think that they can make that next step. But it's also a trap with so many books out there, so many online resources. There's so many places that you can go to just study how to do something that you never actually do the thing that you want to do. So On Writing by Stephen King, Successful Novelist by David Morrell. I love the autobiographies of authors as well. Frederick Forsyth has one called The Outsider that came out last year, the year before. So I love those because they're more the story of that author's life rather than a how-to book. So I love reading those, continue to read those today. And then there's a series of books by Stephen Pressfield on creativity. And Stephen Pressfield wrote Gates of Fire, Legend of Bagger Vance, Afghan Campaign, just an amazing guy. But he has a series of books on creativity that you can read in about an hour, each one in about an hour. One's called The War of Art. The other one's called Turning Pro, Do the Work, The Authentic Swing, Warrior Ethos. And what they really all say is to sit down and do it. And there's a reason we all remember that Nike, just do it. There's a reason that everyone knows that, because it's so simple and it's so true that you have to sit down to do the work. And even if you sit down and do the work, there's no guarantee that you're going to get where you want to go. But what is a guarantee, if you don't sit down and do the work, you're for sure not going to get where you want to go.
Right.
So for me, it's just making those choices. Okay, I'm going to read this. I'm going to read that. Okay, I've got it. Now it's time to do the work. And I can't tell each and every person when that's going to be, because it's going to be a little different for everybody. But what I can say is that it's important not to get bogged down in just studying how to do something. And all those books also can have the opposite intended effect of talking you out of it, because you seem overwhelmed by all the things that one needs to do. You know what? No, someone else has done it. You can do it too. And you can build on what those people have already done and do it better. So that's the main thing, is sitting down and doing it.
And now you're learning something new. You're learning television production with The Terminal List, and Chris Pratt's on board, a huge step in that whole process last year. But what has that been like? I know I've again heard some interviews where you've been on the set as they've been shooting, and that's a 2022 project, right?
Yep, I think so. Sometime in 2022, it'll come out. But they're filming it right now. And I knew next to nothing about screenwriting. So I've been a sponge this entire time. And usually they like to get rid of the author right away. Usually they don't want the author on set saying, "You ruined my vision." But I knew that having studied this my whole life, having read all these books, seen these different adaptations take place over the course of my life, I realized that you're telling a story in a different medium. The written page is different than telling it visually on a screen, whether it's a small screen or the large. I know First Blood, David Morrell, 1972, a very different story than First Blood, the movie starring Sylvester Stallone. Both fantastic. So in my initial sit down with the producers and the production company, I got to talk about all these things, and they were like, okay, this guy gets it. And then Chris Pratt wanted to be involved from the very beginning. He wanted to keep it authentic. He wanted to keep it dark. He wanted to keep it gritty. So that was very important to him, knowing also that the story is going to shift a little bit because of the way you're telling it, but keeping those elements, keeping it raw and real, and all the things that made it resonate with readers, keeping those elements and aspects in the story as we're filming it. That's what's important to Chris and to Antoine Fuqua, who's the directing and is the executive producer that's going through all this. So both fantastic people. It could not be in better hands. And there's a lot of trust involved also when you take something that you've done and you hand it to somebody else to adapt. Like, there's a lot of trust there, and this thing could not be in better hands. But I've learned a ton. I've been quietly watching, taking my notes. Have input on every single script, and it's been a very collaborative process. And I can't wait to see how it all turns out in the end. Fingers crossed, but it couldn't be with a better team. That's for sure.
Well, I'll tell you what. I will be there the night it streams. I'll be there, and when Book 5 comes out again next year for Book 5.
Next year for Book 5, yep, probably April of 2022.
Well, let's hope we get you down to southeastern North Carolina on one of those research tours, or maybe a book tour. We'd love to have you down here at the beach, and I know there's a lot of military people who would love to shake your hand because of everything you've done for that community.
Oh, thank you so much. No, I love North Carolina. Have great memories of being on Fort Bragg prior to Free Fall School out there. Obviously, an incredible history as it pertains to special operations out there. And then one of my favorite knife maker right there, Daniel Winkler, is out there in Boone. So there's a lot of reasons for me to get back out to North Carolina.
Jack, it's been a pleasure today. I really, truly appreciate your time. You're slam busy with a lot of things going on, but this shows the true class that you try to be available to everybody. And even for a small podcast in southeastern North Carolina, you're willing to make some time. Thank you for being my guest today.
Oh, it's an honor, and thank you for having me on. I sincerely appreciate it.
A huge thank you to Jack Carr for joining us for this week's podcast interview. If you want to learn all things Jack Carr, his website is officialjackcarr.com, and there you can learn all about the organizations that Jack supports. Follow him on social media. He's very active on Instagram and Twitter. Jack Carr USA. The Devil's Hand, that's available in bookstores right now. And mark it on your calendar for 2022. Look for Chris Pratt starring as James Reese in The Terminal List on Amazon. Before we go, I'd like to ask you a quick favor. Please download and subscribe to the One-on-One with John Evans podcast on whatever app you use to listen to your favorite shows. And if you would be so kind, please leave us a rating or a review. The more feedback we get from friends like you, the higher we'll be listed on the apps, the better chance we'll have of bringing in even more new listeners. I'm John Evans. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of One-on-One.